Hi, this is Kit, and I'm going to talk you through a impromptu project that I started and then suddenly realized I could video record, which is using the husk of an old triple-wick candle to make new candles. So you can see I've already started hacking at the old candle, and I'll show you a little bit of what I was doing. Looks kind of terrifying when it's sped up a bit, but it's taking an old knife that is a little dull that I don't really use much and just hacking at this large candle husk to break off smaller pieces that can fit inside an old 28-ounce aluminum can. So went thusly creating a number of little crumbly rolls and then a big chunk each time. So this was all put into an aluminum cup, and then that aluminum cup was put into a double boiler. So I already had a few pieces going, so I just kept adding and feeding the wax until it got close to the top with melted wax. This part took probably 30 minutes for it to melt or so. You can see it's melting down there, a few of the solid chunks in the middle. Now, the first candle that I made, I used a teacup mold. So I put a little bit of wax in the bottom and then inserted a wick. What I needed to do was to create a stable bottom because I didn't want to adhere the wick to the cup for fear that it would not come out again later when I needed it to. So I sped up time quite a lot so you can start seeing the drying happening as it solidifies. And I used 2 clothespins to keep the wick up at this point, but that did not work later on, as you will see. Now, I did have some the candle itself wasn't clean, so I wanted to remove the particulates, some of the soot that was in there, a few little wicks that made it through that I wasn't able to extract from the wax as it was melting. So I'm using a handy-dandy coffee filter that I don't use for coffee, that I just use for wax projects to strain out any of the gross pieces. So I'm filling up the rest of my mug, setting my wick, and the heat of the wax actually made the wick soften and then bend, and so this solution with the 2 clothespins did not work any longer. So I finally discovered that was happening after a while. And so I had to figure out how exactly to hold it. So I realized, I'm just pinching it and holding it here. So I really only need 1 clothespin, and then I need a counterbalance on that clothespin. So I kind of used whatever items were sitting around, and then I realized, the perfect counterbalance is another clothespin, which I had. So at this point, I left it to dry and solidify without touching it to let that wax harden. Oop, it fell over. So while I was letting this dry, I was actually processing some more wax. And I had 2 jars that don't really work for canning very well. And so I thought I'll put candles in these jars. So I used a glue dot on the bottom of the wick because with this I wasn't going to extract a clean candle. I was going to let the candle stay in there. So it didn't matter if I needed to take the wick out, it could adhere, which makes it a lot easier to make a candle. And then I realized, of course, that the 2 clothespins was not going to work. So this was my solution to holding the wick in place, which was using 2 craft sticks to pinch it in the right position, tape them on. I think the only difficulty in this setup was it created a small opening for the wax to go through, so I had to be really careful with pouring it in. So again, I'm cleaning the wax up by running it through my coffee filter, removing soot and wick particles and such. And then with my cleaned wax, I'm able to put that into the jars, as so. So as the wick started wiggling around, I just added some more tape, so it created a very specific spot for it to stay in. And that wick didn't really move around. So at this point, I just kept the candles on the counter, allowing them to cool and to harden in place. The cooling probably took 30 minutes to set, to the point where I felt confident that they weren't going to collapse. Probably a good hour to be more solid, but still warm. So it's just a waiting game at this point. And by now, it's 100% certain that you have clicked forward several times to try and get through this point, because it is watching wax harden after all. And you really can't see much happening, so obviously I just stopped that. Once I actually added the mug to the freezer to speed the cooling process and tapped the candle out, came out really nice and clean. With the wax drying, it did create a little bit of a divot in the candle. The others were starting to divot as well with the cooling process, but not quite as badly. That mug, there was just more mass to cool unevenly with the width of it. So now I'm loosening those craft sticks, allowing the candles to come out. And then the last thing is to snip those wicks, which was very exciting. So again, this was maybe 45 minutes or so of cooling, so the candles were still pretty warm aside from the mug one. So you can see how that one turned out. And I lit the candle just to kind of see how it would burn. I wasn't sure if I had somehow just had all the cheap wax come through this process and it would burn really fast. It actually burns just the same as the other candle, which I was pleased about. I did notice there were 2 different kinds of wax in that triple-wick candle, so I wasn't sure if I was wasting all my time in the end. But yeah, it burnt nicely. It still had the scent of the original candle, and I was very pleased with the way that this turned out. And that wax rehardened. I was showing off where you can see the stem. It did remain in the base. And overall, I was really excited about this project that kind of came to me in an impromptu way. And I hope that it encourages you to reuse your old triple wick candles or any other large candles that leave behind a lot of wax. Cheers.